We all have those iconic images of Paris, don't we? The grand boulevards, the Eiffel Tower soaring up.
Instantly recognizable.
But today, we're kind of turning the lens inward. We want to step behind those elegant facades, explore the really fascinating and, well, often hidden world of Parisian interiors.
Yeah, that's the idea.
And our guide for this is the book Hidden Paris, Discovering and Exploring Parisian Interiors. So think of this as like your backstage
A
pass.
backstage pass. I like that. To understanding the secrets held within these buildings.
Exactly.
And it's not just about looking at pretty rooms, is it?
No, not at all.
It's really about trying to decipher how history, how culture have shaped the very spaces where Parisians actually live.
Right. So we'll be looking at the clues the city offers.
Yeah, sometimes it's just, a fleeting glimpse you catch at dusk through a window.
Hmm.
Other times it's through the specific views shared in the book. We're trying to piece together the stories embedded in the architecture, in the design.
Okay, so one of the first things that jumps out at me reading this is how different Paris feels compared to maybe, I don't know, London or New York.
In what way?
Well, in some cities, you can just walk down a residential street and you get a real sense of the lives happening inside, right? You see into windows, maybe front
I
gardens.
see what you mean. Yeah.
So Paris, it feels more guarded somehow, more private.
It absolutely does, especially in the central parts of the city. The street level often presents this very sort of formal face.
Shops, cafes.
Shops, cafes, or just those grand, um, almost impenetrable-looking walls and doors.
Yeah.
It definitely creates this sense, this intriguing feeling that the real story, the real life, is happening just beyond what you can easily see.
Which brings us to these passages the book talks about, these like hidden entrances.
Exactly, often leading to these courtyards that are just, well, completely unexpected.
What's the key to understanding those spaces? Is there a typical type?
Not really, and that's the magic, I think, that element of surprise.
Yeah.
You push open what looks like an ordinary, maybe quite imposing door,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly you find yourself in a totally different atmosphere. These inner courtyards, they're incredibly varied.
So not just one style?
No. You might find a very formal, almost stately space,
Yeah.
paved and symmetrical, or you could stumble into something that feels much more intimate, almost like a little village square tucked away.
Wow.
Often with lots of greenery, maybe some trees, beautiful old staircases climbing up the walls.
And signs of life?
Oh, definitely. Little vignettes of daily life, a bicycle leaning against a wall, pots overflowing with geraniums, which seem to be a real Parisian favorite.
Right.
It really brings home that idea, the book suggests, that Paris is, in a way, a city built from the inside out.
Built inside out. I like that framing.
Yeah,
But the authors do make a point that this isn't the whole story for the entire city, do they?
that's a really important distinction, yes. You think about the areas that were originally separate villages.
Like Montmartre.
Exactly, Montmartre, Belleville. Places incorporated into Paris back in 1860. They still have a very different feel.
How so?
Well, they often retain those winding, sometimes cobbled streets, more individual village-style houses. You get a tangible sense of their distinct identities before they became part of the bigger city fabric.
So the city has these layers, these different personalities almost.
Precisely. Pockets that whisper different stories.
And this whole approach, this sort of hidden inner life, it isn't just random, is it? It's deeply tied into the city's history.
Oh, completely. It's woven into the centuries of development.
Maybe we should trace some of that history, see how it shaped the buildings we view today.
Definitely. If you think about the really long arc of Parisian history, the architecture is like a living timeline. You can trace it right back to Roman times, Lutetia on the Ile de la Cité and the left bank.
And the Seine River being key from the start.
Absolutely central. Always a vital artery for trade, for connection.
Yeah.
That shaped everything.
And then leaping forward a bit, the medieval era gave us some pretty spectacular structures.
Didn't it just? Medieval Paris produced these just incredible Gothic masterpieces. Think of the Abbey of Saint-Denis.
Where the French kings are buried.
That's the one. And, of course, Notre Dame Cathedral. Iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And that period really peaked with what's called Rayonnant Gothic Sainte-Chapelle is the prime example.
It is.
It's a style that's even more ornate, more focused on light and height.
Hmm.
Sainte-Chapelle on the Ile de la Cité again, its stained glass is just breathtaking, almost impossibly delicate.
But that incredible burst of building, it didn't just carry on smoothly, did it? History intervened.
It certainly did. The 14th century brought huge challenges. You had the Hundred Years' War, the Black Death.
Devastating.
Absolutely. And it led to a real slowdown in major construction for quite a long time. Things didn't really pick up again in a big way until Henri V's reign.
Late 16th, early 17th century.
Exactly. And he really started to reshape the city's face.
How did he do that?
Well, he guided Paris away from its predominantly medieval look. Think of projects like the Place des Vosges,
Ah, beautiful. So symmetrical.
isn't it? And the Pont Neuf, the Place Dauphine. These really set a new, more harmonious classical tone. And the city kept expanding outwards, gradually swallowing up the surrounding suburbs.
But again, progress wasn't always linear. More setbacks.
History keeps interrupting, doesn't it? The 19th century saw more growth, yes, but then came the Franco-Prussian War, the Siege of Paris, the Paris Commune. Tumultuous times.
Right.
And all that brought architectural development pretty much to a halt again for a while. It was only really after peace returned in 1871 that the city started expanding significantly once more.
And that's when we start seeing new styles emerge.
Yes, that's when you get the beginnings of Art Nouveau, those flowing organic lines. The most famous examples are probably Hector Guimard's metro station entrances.
Instantly Parisian.
Totally. But then the 20th century brought its own reactions and challenges.
A move away from Art Nouveau.
Yes, a reaction against it, really. After World War I, you see the rise of modernism and Art Deco, figures like Le Corbusier, Robert Mellett Stevens, and iconic buildings like the Maison de Verre, the Glass House.
Mhm.
Then, of course, World War II and the occupation brought another major interruption. It wasn't really until the 1960s under de Gaulle that large-scale building projects got going again in a big way.
And that era gave us some pretty bold structures.
Very bold. The Centre Pompidou, famously wearing its infrastructure on the outside.
Right, the pipes and escalator.
Exactly. And all the modern towers out at La Défense, they really changed the skyline.
And more recently,
Well, the Pompidou and later I.M. Pei's Louvre Pyramid, they sort of signaled this move towards putting contemporary prestige architecture right within the historic city fabric.
interesting tension there.
Definitely. And another fascinating trend more recently is converting old industrial sites, warehouses, workshops into really innovative modern apartments and lofts.
It's incredible how you can almost read all those layers just by looking around the city.
You really can. It's all there, woven together.
Okay, let's zoom in a bit now. Let's talk about some of the specific architectural details that really scream Paris, the things that contribute to this hidden world we're exploring.
Okay. Well, one thing that stands out across centuries is the use of certain materials.
Yeah.
That Lutetia limestone, the Paris stone.
Ah, yes. That creamy color.
Exactly. It's been the main building material since the 17th century, really. It gives a lot of the city that visual coherence, even across different architectural styles.
And the decorations on the buildings.
The facades themselves are often really richly decorated. You see beautifully carved stone details everywhere.
Like what kind of things?
Oh, you often find these interesting wooden mascarons above doorways or windows. They could be animals, mythical figures, classical heroes, sometimes just like overflowing baskets of fruit or foliage.
Adds character.
Definitely. And then there's the wrought ironwork, just stunning.
Balconies.
Balconies, window guards, elaborate door grills, intricate designs from different periods, really beautiful craftsmanship. And don't forget the flowers.
Window boxes.
Yes. Potted plants on balconies, window boxes. Geraniums seem to be the absolute classic choice, adding these pops of bright red or pink.
We touched on courtyards earlier, but what about getting to them from the street? What's that journey like?
Okay, so often the big street door, the port, opens into a cobbled entrance hall. That's the porte cochere.
Porte cochere, carriage entrance, right?
Exactly. Historically, that's where horse-drawn carriages would pass through into the main courtyard.
Makes sense.
And tucked away in that entrance hall, you'll almost always find the concierge's little office, the loge. Often just a window, maybe with a lace curtain.
The eyes and ears of the building.
Kind of, yeah. And then that porte cochere leads you into the central courtyard itself. That courtyard space is just such a consistent, essential feature of Parisian buildings, old and new.
And the staircases. The book suggests they're not just functional.
No, definitely not. Staircases in Paris often make a real statement. In the grander buildings, the old aristocratic townhouses, the hotels particuliers or chateaux, you might find these incredible sweeping double staircases made of marble or stone.
Very dramatic.
Hugely dramatic, almost theatrical. But even the humbler staircases you find tucked into doorways or leading up from courtyards in ordinary apartment buildings,
Yeah.
they often have this real charm. Twisting upwards, worn steps. They invite you to explore.
Okay, let's talk doors and windows. The book mentions something called the enfilade. What's that about?
Ah, the enfilade. It's a really key concept in French architecture. Basically, it means arranging rooms in a sequence, one after the other, with all the doorways lined up perfectly.
So you can see right through several rooms.
Exactly. Creates these long, impressive vistas. Started in palaces like Versailles, partly for show, demonstrating status, but also practical for circulation.
And it carried on.
Oh, yes. You see it a lot in the 19th century Haussmannian apartments.
Hmm.
It creates this series of interconnected rooms, often parallel to the main facade, and it lets light flow beautifully through the apartment.
And the doors themselves, are they special?
They're often treated as really important decorative elements in their own right. Beautifully paneled, molded, painted, sometimes even gilded. A well-designed door and its frame really matter in a Parisian interior.
Right. And the windows, we talk about French windows.
Yes, those tall, elegant casement windows that usually open inwards, like a pair of doors. They're a very recognizable French style. You find them everywhere. Grand buildings, apartments, even shops opening onto balconies, into courtyards, sometimes even just between interior rooms. They let in so much light.
Even things like shops and markets seem to add to the visual texture of Paris, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the Parisian markets. The big grand food halls, the grandes épiceries, the covered markets, the bustling open-air ones. They're a feast for the eyes, not just the stomach. And you find these amazing specialist craft shops dotted all over the city, like Eda Hillern for professional kitchenware, a real institution.
Right.
There's just this inherent art of display in Parisian shops, even the smallest ones. A real sense of style and how things are presented.
Now, we can't really talk about Parisian architecture without digging into Baron Haussmann's impact. It was huge, wasn't it?
Oh, monumental. You can't overstate it. His 19th century urban planning project fundamentally reshaped Paris.
The wide boulevards.
The wide boulevards, yes, cutting through the old medieval city.
Mm.
And those standardized apartment buildings that line them.
What are the key features of those Haussmannian buildings?
Okay, well, visually, you've got the distinctive wrought iron balconies. Often the most elaborate ones are on the premier etage, the first floor above the ground floor. Then you have things like pilasters, those flat, sort of column-like strips running up the facade and cornices, the decorative moldings along the top. These often run right along a whole block, tying all the buildings together visually. Creates a real sense of harmony and grandeur.
And inside those buildings, it's not all one type of apartment.
No, definitely not. You get the main principal apartments, often quite spacious, high ceilings, elegant details. But then up in the eaves, you have the smaller attic rooms, the chambre de bonne.
The maids' rooms originally.
Exactly, originally for servants.
Yeah.
So there's quite a range. And adapting these spaces, especially the more formal layouts of the grander apartments for modern living, well, takes some ingenuity. And style, of course.
Which brings us nicely to this idea of classic chic interior design. The book talks about this a lot. What exactly is it?
Yeah, classic chic. It feels like a really good way to describe that quintessential Parisian knack for blending things.
Blending what?
Respect for classicism, for tradition, for the building's bones, but mixing it with this innate sense of what feels stylish, comfortable, and relevant now.
Yeah.
Effortless chic,
Okay, so what is it not?
Good question. It's definitely not old-fashioned or stuffy. It's not overstuffed with heavy furniture. It's not usually very dark. And it's generally not rigidly minimalist or overly gray, despite some trends.
So what are its defining features, then?
It generally feels lighter, brighter. There's real attention to detail, but it's focused on comfort, too.
Yeah.
It's livable.
Yeah.
And underlying it all is this deep understanding, or maybe just an intuition, about classical rules, proportion, scale, balance.
Mm-hmm.
You'll often see a mix of furniture, maybe some elegant antiques or vintage finds sitting happily next to contemporary pieces. And the color palettes tend to feel sophisticated, but also quite calm and timeless. Not necessarily neutral, but harmonious.
And the book shows lots of examples of this, right? Through case studies.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The case studies are great because they show the sheer variety within that Parisian sensibility.
Mm.
It's not one single look.
Can you give us a few examples? Just a taste of the range.
Sure. Well, you see some beautiful contemporary updates of classic Haussmannian apartments. There's one example, Florence Baudu, who uses shades of gray really elegantly to make it feel modern but still connected to the history.
Okay.
Then you get spaces that mix in, say, retro design from the 50s or 70s with other periods, creating something really personal and layered.
Like collectors' homes.
Yeah. Or those industrial conversions we mentioned, old workshops turned into amazing modern lofts. Very different vibe. And then you have the really individual, almost theatrical places like Vincent Deré's apartment. He calls it his House of Marvels, just full of personality and unique objects.
Sounds fun.
It looks incredible. And then contrast that with something like Rosita Missoni, where it's all about bold, joyful color and pattern. Still chic, but in a completely different way.
Wow, so it really runs the gamut.
It does. You see minimalist, art-focused spaces too, places
Yeah.
that really try to bring the outside in, connect with nature or the view, and even tiny little apartments, the bijou spaces, that are just incredibly cleverly designed and stylish. Proof that you don't need huge square footage.
It really sounds like a spectrum of personal expression, but maybe all within a certain sort of shared understanding of style.
I think that's a good way to put it.
And this design sense, it feels completely tied up with the Parisian way of life, doesn't it? That famous l'art de vivre.
Oh, absolutely. They're inseparable. How Parisians design and use their homes is a deep reflection of their art of living.
We see bits of it outwardly, like cafe culture.
Right, that's an obvious external manifestation. But it goes much deeper. Modern French social life, in some ways, still has echoes of the formal etiquette from Louis XIV's court.
Really? Like how?
Well, just in the emphasis on certain traditions, maybe more formal greetings sometimes, the ritual around meals. There's a value placed on politeness, on presentation, even the importance given to setting a table beautifully. It reflects the pleasure taken in shared meals in conversation.
And does that philosophy affect how space is used inside the home?
I think so, yes. The living and dining areas often seem to be the real heart of the home. They're prioritized because that's where family life, entertaining, that conviviality happens.
So maybe bedrooms are smaller as a result.
Often, yeah. Bedrooms might be more compact, more purely functional as private spaces because the emphasis is on the shared areas. And French living rooms, they often feel a little more formally arranged than, say, a typical British or American one. And you almost never see fitted wall-to-wall carpets. It's overwhelmingly parquet flooring, herringbone, chevron, Versailles panels.
Which adds to that light, elegant feel.
Exactly. It reflects light beautifully. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that whole shabby chic look, intentionally distressed furniture, faded florals, that's not really part of the chic Parisian repertoire. They tend to prefer things a bit more polished, even if the overall feel is relaxed.
Interesting distinction. What about outdoor spaces? Terraces, balconies, those rooftop gardens you sometimes glimpse?
Ah, yes. Those are incredibly valued. Given the density of the city, any private outdoor space is prized.
And they put effort into them.
Huge effort and creativity. Terraces and rooftop gardens become these precious green escapes. The designs vary wildly. Some are lush jungles, others are more minimalist, chic extensions of the living space. But the desire to create that connection with nature, that little oasis, is really strong.
And kitchens and dining rooms, you mentioned the importance of meals.
Yes, they really are central hubs. That French emphasis on properly sitting down and enjoying meals together, it's instilled from a very young age.
Not just grabbing food on the go.
Generally, no. The act of sharing a meal, the conversation around the table, it's a core part of social life. It's quite different from a culture of constant grazing.
And the kitchens themselves, what styles do you see?
Again, a real range. You see super sleek contemporary kitchens, of course, but also many that charmingly mix modern appliances with maybe vintage cabinets or a big old farmhouse table. But whatever the style, the dining table itself, whether it's in the kitchen or a separate room, is usually a key focal point.
Okay. And bedrooms. Even if they're sometimes smaller, how are they treated?
Comfort and personal expression seem key. They're seen as sanctuaries. So while they might not be huge, there's often a lot of thought put into creating a restful, intimate atmosphere. Maybe a mix of textures, treasured objects, art, making it a really personal space.
Right. And finally, bathrooms. Always a practical necessity, especially fitting them into old buildings.
Exactly. Bathrooms obviously have universal functions, and space is always a challenge in cities like Paris, particularly in older buildings that weren't originally designed with multiple modern bathrooms.
So you need clever solutions.
You really do.
Yeah.
Parisians often have to be quite ingenious about carving out functional, stylish bathrooms from awkward corners or reconfiguring layouts.
This style.
Again, you see the whole spectrum. Streamlined and modern, classic with metro tiles, sometimes quite ornate with vintage fittings. It depends on the apartment's overall style and, frankly, the available space.
This has been absolutely fascinating, really getting beneath the surface. So, as we start to wrap this up, what are the main takeaways? What should we remember from this deep dive?
I think the biggest thing is realizing that Parisian interiors are so much more than just, decoration or furniture choices.
Mm.
They're really a tangible expression of the city's incredibly rich, layered history, its specific cultural values, and this very distinctive way of life, the art de vivre.
And that idea of Paris being built inside out.
That really captures it, I think. The sense that so much of the story, the history, the personality is hidden away behind those often quite formal facades waiting to be discovered in the courtyards and apartments within.
It definitely makes you think differently about just walking down a Parisian street.
It does. It encourages you to look closer, maybe peek through a closing porte cochere if you get the chance.
Ah, yes. And it prompts a wider question, too, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, it makes you wonder. How do the history and the culture of your own surroundings shape the spaces that you live in? What hidden stories might your own home reveal if you stop to really look?
That's a great question, a really thought-provoking one to end on. What stories are embedded in our own walls?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this glimpse into the hidden world of Parisian interiors. It's been truly insightful.
My pleasure. It's a endlessly fascinating subject.